Talk to us a little bit about how to make sure that when you do adopt technology, you actually get the value out of it.
Three things. One is selling is still a process and it hasn't really changed much. So that means that therefore the technology should augment that. The other thing is that you've got to remember people can be very easily overwhelmed by all of this. The third thing is it's all about effectiveness. Just because you've got technology out there doesn't mean it's actually being used.
You spent hours in meetings and demos, listening to product pitches, conferring with your internal stakeholders, going through procurement, and you've finally done it. You've added a new software to your revenue tech stack. Before you've even paid the bill, it was an expensive acquisition. But it's going to be even more expensive if that new software becomes shelfware after just a few months. Underused or unused software is another form of revenue leak and a major drain on the business. That's exactly what Sam Sutton-Reid is here to help you avoid. In his 7 years at Pearson, he's been a regional sales manager, worked in product, been the head of sales enablement, and now he's the director of revenue operations. This breadth of experience across the revenue organization, especially his time in enablement, gives him a unique perspective on how to get the most from people, processes, and technology. Sam breaks down his 5 areas of RevOps and dives into some of the big misconceptions about adopting revenue technologies. So make sure you stick around to the end for Sam's advice on ways sellers can help their buyers with internal conversations. Over to you, Kyle.
I'm Kyle Coleman, sales pro turned SVP of marketing at Clary. Run Revenue is the show where revenue pros learn to stop revenue leak, achieve revenue precision, and grow their companies and careers.
This is Run Revenue Show with Kyle Coleman.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Run Revenue Show. I'm thrilled to be joined today by my personal friend, Sam Sutton-Reid. Sam, how you doing?
Hey, Kyle, I'm good. How are you? Nice to see you.
I'm doing very, very good. So today we're going to be talking about a topic that's on so many revenue leaders' minds, which is how can you avoid shelfware with your revenue technology? But first, so tell us a little bit about who you are, where you've been, and how you got to Pearson.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm Sam. Who am I? Where have I been? That's a big question, Kyle. So I think, I started off, way back. My first proper job was in a coffee shop, but you probably don't want to know about that. Although I did learn some interesting things there. So I first got into the world of sales as, I guess, an SDR really, although no one was really calling us that at the time. Yeah, I know you love that, Kyle. So, it was like, 50 dials a day and booking appointments for the AEs at the time. So that was way back, a long time ago in 2006. There was no technology in the sales force whatsoever. There was nothing going on. We just had a phone and, literally just called as many customers as we probably could. I, then migrated on to, being an account manager and an AE, moved companies a few times. I think the really pivotal moment was I was a sales manager and I'd been a sales manager for a while. And I have to be honest, I was getting a little bit bored of it. And a role came up in product. So I decided to make a big shift over to product management.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was a first comment. So it was a comment for a year. And it was just a fantastic opportunity to work on a completely different side of a business. And I think the real thing that struck me there was how little I knew about product management was probably the first sort of really dawning thing that came to me. But then also how little product managers knew about what makes salespeople tick and what salespeople need. So it's sort of like it was a really natural migration from that to sales enablement. So I did a couple of years heading up the sales enablement team at Pearson and was really passionate about making sure we were inspiring salespeople. Like we used to have the words that we watched out for in sales enablement. A big one for us was inspiration. Like that's what we wanted to do. We wanted salespeople to go out inspired to sell the products, to have the skills they needed. It was sort of a couple of years doing that, and I kept hearing about the technology that was happening. I'm naturally a bit of a geek and enjoy a spreadsheet, as most RevOps people do. So I sort of gravitated towards forecasting, gravitated towards analysis, and then an opportunity to set up the RevOps team at Pearson came up. And it's a bit of a bold claim, but I'm pretty sure I might be RevOps employee number 1 at Pearson. Yeah, that's exciting. And now I run a RevOps team, a very small one. There's just 5 of us. And we support all the platforms and the technology and the analytics and enablement across Pearson Workforce Solutions, which is part of Pearson.
That's incredible, Sam. I had no idea that you had that foray into product management. It makes a lot of sense, the journey that you took, and now this kind of natural path, or I guess the opportunities that presented for you to move into revenue operations. And you started to tell us a little bit about what the charge of the RevOps team is at Pearson. Give us a little more detail. Like, what all are you responsible for? What are the main things that you're trying to make happen?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Right. Because funnily enough, I met with some RevOps people yesterday in London. Shout out to the RevOps community in London. I hope they're all listening. It was very interesting to see that there is an overlap between what we do, but there is definitely differences as well. It's still a sort of emerging area, if you like. But I think for us, we essentially separate it out into 5 areas, perhaps. So the first area, enablement. These are in no particular order, incidentally. So first area, enablement. So I've got an enablement team, and they focus on making sure our new starters ramp quickly, that they have a great experience. They're, driving towards learning programs for sales skills, for sales methodology adoption, etc. And then also just generally looking for opportunities, I think, to, where perhaps tools or resources or training can support, a better go-to-market. Then I have my platforms team. So the platforms team are all about making sure all of our technology works together, making sure it adheres to Pearson security requirements, data privacy, things like that, but also the integrations. And I think that's so important. Like, we've all got quite disparate tech stacks, and integrating them all into one, entity, if you like, not necessarily all under one technology roof, perhaps, but one entity that works seamlessly together. That's really important. And that's what the platforms people do. And then I've got an analytics team. There's a bit of a clue in the name of what they do there, right? But they're constantly looking at the data. And it's not just data, though, in analytics. It's also the process and the flows as well. So how can we make sure the data that we've got is not only available and telling us something and giving us insight, but also is actually good quality and actually is accurate. The final 2 bits kind of sit with me. The final 2 bits would be the comp plan, making sure we're running that and getting that, managed on time, etc. And then the strategy, if you like, working with the VPs across sales, marketing and customer success, and indeed the whole teams, and bringing all that together to kind of inform our growth strategy that we're undertaking at the moment.
That is quite a purview, Sam. And what's interesting to me about it, you hit on so many disparate things that obviously are all connected, and the interoperability of all those different people and teams and technologies is super important. And it's no wonder then that revenue operations is the fastest growing job in the world over the last 5 years. It's pretty wild, and you're on the forefront of this movement. Let's talk more about the topic of today, which is revenue technology adoption. You mentioned in your early days as a seller way back in 2006, you didn't have much. You had a phone, you had a phone book. Did you have a manual CRM, pen and paper kind of deal? Like, that's what I had when I started. Yeah, fast forward, 15, 20 years, and there are dozens, hundreds, thousands probably of sales tools to choose from. And so talk to us a little bit about your overall take on revenue technology. And then we can talk more about how to make sure that when you do adopt technology, you actually get the value out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think revenue technology is a really exciting space, and I'm a sucker for it. I do enjoy the sort of the technologies we have and what they can do. But I think therein lies a few truths that we always have to be aware of with them. So number one is selling really hasn't changed that much, to be honest with you. In some respects, yes, that there are certain things that have become more sophisticated. Revenue technologies have certainly helped us, be more aware of our funnels and our motions. But actually, if I think back to 2006, one of the things I was doing, and I'd like to think I was okay at sales, was effectively a sales engagement plan, just without a sales engagement tool. I was going to send these emails today. I'm going to follow up on these emails tomorrow. It's very rudimentary, but it was essentially the same thing, right? It's the same with, if you think about conversational intelligence tools that I'm sure lots of the listeners would have. Yes, they're amazing and you do fantastic things. But actually, some of my best learning moments as a salesperson was when, a sales manager was with me and they fed something back to me and they picked up on something. They encouraged me with something, or maybe they challenged me with something. Effectively, it was just a live conversational intelligence person sitting next to me, if you like, rather than a device doing it for me or a platform doing it for me. I think it's really important to remember that selling is still a process, and it's still a process driven by people. I think in terms of my take on the world of revenue technology, I would say it's exciting. It's overwhelming as well. And I don't just mean overwhelming for people that are investing in it. I think it's overwhelming for people that are coming into an organization and expected to use all of this technology. I think it's really interesting that we make an assumption that people might be comfortable with these things. They maybe have used it before in a different role. And often that's true, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're using these things well. And so I think like my big things are, my three things there that I guess I'm trying to say is, one is selling is still a process and it hasn't really changed much. So that means that therefore the technology should augment that. I think the other thing is that you've got to remember people can be very easily overwhelmed by all of this. And then I think the third thing is it's all about effectiveness. So just because you've got technology out there doesn't mean it's actually being used.
This is super interesting, and I happen to completely agree. And I would say the thing I want to dig into now, Sam, is you've got this background as a seller, as a product manager, as an enablement person, now in RevOps. Talk to us about some misconceptions that people have about the adoption of revenue technology. You started to hit on it. You started to say that, people assume that people are more comfortable using these tools, and maybe they are. People assume that these tools maybe will be more helpful or more groundbreaking than maybe they are. What other assumptions do you see people fall victim to?
Well, I think a big assumption is that adoption equals effectiveness, though that doesn't apply. The two are completely separate. They're not interrelated with one another. And so I think a big thing for me that we're trying to do at the moment, and it is quite a difficult thing to do, I would say, is kind of matching specifically what adoption looks like, as in not just basic adoption, like have they logged into the platform or whatever it may be, if you see what I mean, like how are they using it versus how are they performing, and sort of plotting that, if you like. And the thing that I'm trying to develop, and I will fully admit to the audience that this is still a work in progress, as everything often is in RevOps, if you see what I mean. I feel like you can almost apply a personas approach to this problem, if you like, where you go, right, I've got the certain persona who's a fantastic AE, they're a brilliant AE. What is it that they actually do? And I mean, not only, what they do with the customer, it's like, how quickly do they respond to emails? Because we can measure that. What's the level of personalization, if you like, of their outreach? How long do they talk on a call? It's almost pulling all those things together and then creating a persona based on that. But then equally, I don't think you necessarily can then just apply that persona to everyone, right? Because some people have different skills. It's finding that balance, I think, between the individuals that you have and getting them to be inspired rather than feel like they have to use the technology because it's there. Because otherwise you just get that adoption. It doesn't mean effectiveness. You've got a sales engagement tool, you can send a lot of emails, right? Or if you're a marketer, you can send a lot of emails. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's leading to results. The thing I always come back to is sales velocity. So the things we're doing, how are they driving sales velocity? And I don't mean literally calculating it. You can do that, but it can be almost a bit redundant calculating sales velocity in some respects. It's more like, what lever are we trying to pull here? Is our problem the number of opportunities we have? So is this addressing this? Is our problem our conversion rate? Wrapping around all of that, the people side of it. So I think that's one. I don't know if it's a mistake as such, if you see what I mean, but one thing that we get wrong. I think the other big thing is people assume that people understand why we're using these tools. Why is conversational intelligence a good thing? Why is revenue intelligence a good thing? Why is sales engagement useful? All of these things. Now, some are really obvious, so I think some are easier than others, perhaps. But yeah, do you know your why, essentially? Like, can you actually state very simply why? And can your team do that as well? If you're a big RevOps team, actually, is your team doing that consistently? Are the managers doing that?
What always matters to salespeople is what's in it for me. You have to show me that this is actually going to help me achieve some sort of tangible result, some sort of tangible outcome. Otherwise, you're going to lose my interest. And not only that, but this tool or technology, it has to be easier than the way that I'm currently going about things. If I can go into Google Drive and find the thing I need to find in 5 seconds, and you're telling me I need to go into a different CMS and spend 10 minutes trying to find that thing, I'm not going to do that. I think the way that you just broke it down, Sam, is really smart. You have to architect by persona the jobs to be done, the workflows, and you have to show them that there is a tangible result, a tangible outcome that they will realize if they play ball. So let's say you do all that and you've inspired them and you feel like, okay, my enablement team, my platforms team, everything is going really well. And yet, let's say a month later, the tool isn't being adopted. What do you do at that point? How do you think about it at that point? I'm sure you've been there before.
Yeah, I have. I think it starts way earlier than that. So I think when you get to that point, you've got a problem, essentially, and you actually probably need to stop and maybe reassess your approach. I'm a big fan of the idea of using fear of missing out as a sort of driver for behaviours. I sort of like, if my colleagues in my old role were listening to this now, they'd be laughing because I'd always call it the power of FOMO. So let's use the power of FOMO here. The reason why I'd be laughing is just the first time I actually said it is I actually said, let's use the power of MOFO. But yeah, that was like, I don't know what that is. But the power of FOMO being, how do you get the salespeople selling it to themselves and to their colleagues? So a really good example was I rolled out a content tool, a brilliant content tool, but I knew the sales teams would not use it. It was quite a traditional sales force at the time that I was working with. They liked attaching things to email. That's what they were used to. They were like, well, why should I bother? And they often had their own versions of things. And, the marketing people didn't always like those versions of things, if you see what I mean. Or very often didn't, if you see what I mean. But
I'm living that right now.
People were just, used to working in their own and in their own ways. So we knew it would be a bit of a battle. So we decided to advertise early adopter access and said that there was limited spaces. We said there's 6 spaces available for early adopter access to this. And this is roughly what it's going to do. And we had a teaser trailer. So we did a teaser trailer and we said first come, first served. Now, straight away, we had a bunch of people want to do it. Okay. And actually, what was really interesting and exciting about that, it wasn't maybe, and I hate to group people by age or things like that. And it often happens when you're using technology and it's often wrong as well. But, it was a really diverse bunch of people and that was great. So
it goes a long way.
Absolutely. We threw everything at getting these people to love the platform, if you like. We spent loads of time with them, got them excited, empowered them to make decisions as well as to how the platform would be used, changes, thanked them. We even send them swag and things like that, all these sorts of things that you can do to get them excited. And then when we launched the platform about a month later, A, it was better because actually we'd had feedback from people that were real users, and B, we could just get them talking about it. And the usage was amazing. That was a real success. So we never got to that point, if you see what I mean, where I'm saying so that's probably the bit that I've missed in the not assuming why and not assuming, and personas and etc. and all of that stuff. You have to market it and sell it. It's an internal sales strategy and you wouldn't just dump a new product on a group of customers and expect results.
Exactly. And I think what a lot of RevOps people fall into when they're responsible for rolling out new technology is RevOps folks are so logical. Like you said, spreadsheet oriented, numbers are the numbers. And they think that this technology is going to help you be more efficient or drive better outcomes. I have all the numbers. I can show you all the proof. But the fact of the matter is, people are emotional people. They're not always, strictly speaking, logical people. And so you have to appeal to that emotion. And that way that you just talked us through, Sam, that internal marketing, that kind of test pilot group, the limited access, the FOMO, all those things is really an important part of rolling these things out well. So is that a repeatable thing that you do now every single time you have something new?
Yeah, it's interesting. And when we rolled out Clary, which was a fantastic experience, but when we did that, it was interesting that I was like, no, we're going to do it this way. We're going to get some early adopters on board. And it's interesting, I don't think even the implementation team that we were working with were I think we can really get easily swept up in we set you up and then we add all the users and then you invite all the users and then we do the enablement. And it's a very sort of tried and tested approach, if you see what I mean. And I think you have to break the rules and say, no, actually, we're not going to do that. We'll get there. But we're going to put that back a little bit. We're going to put that back like a month. But if we put it back a month and we involve some people early, we can turn it on its head, if you see what I mean, and we can get better results. And it doesn't always work, though. You've got to be careful, right? It's not a strategy you can use every single time. You can't constantly be advertising these amazing opportunities to get involved in this new platform. So you've got to be creative.
Right.
I've done other things this is way back to in my enablement days. We shifted from Google to Microsoft and everyone was up in arms about it and stressed about it. And, and everyone thought Microsoft was awful compared to Google and, et cetera, et cetera. So to get people using SharePoint, I made a treasure hunt. I made a digital treasure hunt around SharePoint. And I didn't even tell anyone about it. So I just put clues around SharePoint, and then people started noticing it. And then there was a prize if you solved the treasure hunt. And then I would start announcing on Teams, oh, this person's just won this. They completed the treasure hunt. And people would be like, well, where does the treasure? I was like, I'm not telling you. You got to be creative is all I'm saying, right? Like, especially in times post-COVID when you don't have those moments in the office. You don't have you're not making a cup of tea or a coffee or whatever and speaking to someone and they say, oh, have you used this new thing? Or have you done this? It's really good. Or I'm struggling with this, or I can help you. Everyone can be a little bit isolated. Things that bring people together in a way that makes them smile and have fun is probably a good idea.
This is a commonality among all enablement people, revenue operations people, anybody who's working with sellers. All these people who are successful, the commonality is they have fun. Like, for some reason, there's some aversion to breaking a smile, teasing yourself a little bit, being a little self-deprecating. And I know that's something that you do very well, Sam. We're not curing cancer here. We're selling software. We're selling stuff. We're allowed to take a beat, to break a smile, to have a little bit of fun here. It makes a big difference. It humanizes things. It gets people bought in. It allows them to show them that you're just trying to bring them along a journey. You're trying to add value to their life, and you're trying to make it as painless as possible.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what's interesting that I'm resonating on what you said, Kyle, is revenue ops people can be very logical, and I certainly can be that, definitely. We recently rolled out a small addition to Salesforce, if you like a plugin. The question I was asking the product marketing team who were rolling it out were how are we going to get people using it? And they were an example of some logical thinkers in product marketing as well. And they went, well, why wouldn't they? I was like, no, that's not the right question. To them, it was really obvious. It's a content tool basically that gives competition, competitive information up to date. It's a fantastic tool, to be honest with you. But it's that logical brain. And also when you're really close to something, that's what I used to see in product all the time. When I worked in product management, they'd be like, well, why wouldn't they sell this product? It's the best product. I've spent 2 years working on it. They don't look at things like that. Yeah.
So on the topic of avoiding shelfware, it has to do with usage, it has to do with adoption, it has to do with effectiveness, as you put it. But there's another component here, Sam, which is selling these investments up the chain to your CFO, to your CRO, to your CEO, whoever the budget stakeholder is. So talk to us a little bit about how you prove value to the budget holders inside your company.
That's a really interesting one. And it is difficult, and it's arguably probably recently might become a bit more difficult with the sort of the global economy, etc. I think for me, it's all about planning. So you can't just dump an idea on people and say, hey, why don't we do this? You've got to be like, I think we need to do this in the coming months or year or whatever your time frame is that you work to your cycles on in terms of planning and budgeting. So you've got to be thinking ahead as a revenue operations leader. I always try and articulate total cost of ownership or return on investment or whatever you want to call it. If we're doing these things manually at the moment, or if it's replacing a human being doing that work, how much does that really cost? I think people often underestimate that, the real cost of anything that's being done manually and the risk associated with it as well.
Yes.
If that person isn't around, or if, literally when things end up getting built on spreadsheets and things like that, they can break very easily. They can be difficult to manage. Pearson is a big company and people may be aware of us who are listening, but in reality, the bit of the business that I'm in is a couple of acquisitions that have been put together. And so we've kind of gone from sort of startup mentality to scale up mentality quite quickly. And I think, in startup, you can often get away with maybe doing something in a bit of a sort of DIY, do-it-yourself fashion, if you like. But they often come with a cost, especially when you scale up. It's thinking about planning, it's thinking about the cost. And then I think the other thing is stakeholder management, involving them in the decision. Being like, this is what I want to do. This is why I want to do it. This is the problem we're trying to solve. And, in the case of some of the larger investments we've made recently, I want their opinion. They're not just a budget holder to tick it off or not. I want them to validate. I'm genuinely and authentically seeking their views as people who have a fantastic experience alongside me that can add thoughts to the process. It can be tricky, certainly. I wouldn't say that there's some sort of silver bullet, if you like, but those are the sort of things I think about when I'm working with those people.
A lot of what you talked about there, Sam, it translates obviously post adoption once you've implemented this tool or the solution, whatever it is. But you also talked about, I think, some of the pre-sales components of getting buy-in and bringing your stakeholders along. My question for you now has more to do with what can a seller do to help you navigate those conversations, to help you be effective in those conversations with your executives?
It's a really, really interesting question. And actually, funnily enough, I smile a little bit at this because a couple of our sellers, I think, recently worked out that actually I'm a buyer and that I buy stuff off people who are similar to them, if you see what I mean. So then they've started asking me this same question, which I love the fact that they're thinking like that, if you see what I mean. Well, there's probably a lot of elements to this. I think one thing is if you're selling to RevOps people, or it's like you're working with people like RevOps people, like I want to see it, I want to play with it, I want to use it. I probably want to be left on my own to do that a little bit as well. I guess what I'm saying is not selling the idea. There is a time to do that, right? There's a time to get people bought into the why we're doing this thing, whatever your software is or whatever it is you do. But actually, they want to see it a lot of the time. I think the other thing as well is we've had some fantastic experiences where we've had companies that have matched the people we're engaging with. And what I mean by that is like, we've got a finance person from the company talking to our finance person, if you see what I mean, and actually talking their language, and genuinely asking questions during the discovery phase that are actually useful, if you see what I mean. And then I think the other thing as well is I saw a really interesting stat. The customer that you're dealing with probably knows about 78% of what you can tell them already about your product. Back in 2006, to wind right back to those beautiful days, I would go see customers and they wouldn't have a clue really what we did. So the role I was playing as a salesperson was to actually furnish them with information. Now it's quite the opposite. And actually, because of that, I've got 78% of the information, if that's true, for every single different company I'm looking at, for every single different project I'm looking at. And it's really overwhelming. So the role of a salesperson, and probably the marketing team as well, I think, is to keep bringing me back to the simplicity, like the simple art of the possible, the simple why, and make it real. Because it can be quite overwhelming out there at the moment, I would say, when you're making procurements.
That's a really, really nice little summary there at the end. The role of the salesperson and of marketing is to keep bringing you back to simplicity of the art of the possible. Yeah. Like that vision, the creation that you're doing together. And then, of course, as you mentioned before, the business cases that you're building, the total cost of ownership, the ROI, whatever it is that the executive teams need to bring. But really, the role of the salesperson is to help make the decision easier.
Yep.
Because I know this as a buyer of technology. I expect you feel the same way, Sam. Buying technology is not easy.
No.
I think a lot of salespeople lose sight of that. It's not only hard to get budget and get all the right stakeholders on board and all of that, but then to actually implement it, to actually get value out of it. Like all of these things, they're different steps and they're all difficult for different reasons. And it's important for sellers to always keep that in mind and have empathy with the buyer and make sure that you are positioning them well to have success with the tool. Otherwise, you're going to be probably looking at a churn event in no time flat.
And a lesson that I learned a long time ago from a brilliant sales manager I had way back was he said, your biggest competition is a really, really strong company. They're amazing. They're kind of the market leader, really, and they're called Do Nothing PLC. That is how it goes, right? And I've been on the receiving end of that, like on the other end of that, if you like, where you're like, this is too hard. Like, I'm just going to shelve this project. If the sales process itself is really hard and the implementation is looking really hard and you're really busy and you maybe don't have enough resource, so it's like if you make it complicated, you're almost bringing another competitor into the ring, I would say.
Exactly. All right. So now back to the point of you have software that you've implemented. You're hoping that it's going to get used. Talk to us a little bit at kind of taking a different angle here, Sam, on this main topic and perhaps an expectation that your leadership has of you, which is on consolidation.
Yeah.
So you're starting to see that technology maybe isn't being as well adopted as you think. And now you hear that this competitor also has these capabilities. Like, how do you think about technology consolidation? How do you think about your role in bringing on as few products as possible, so as few point solutions as possible to make life easier for your sellers?
Well, and it's something that I think we've got to really address over the coming years, really. And it is something that I wouldn't say anything really keeps me up at night, to be honest with you, because like, especially not from a work point of view, because I don't get that stress. But if I was to get that stress, then it would be something that I would worry about, which is, we do have a lot of different vendors. I think we've selected the best in class in their particular areas, or the most suitable for us. I think the problem has been historically that there's no sort of single vendor, I think, out there quite yet that sort of is doing really well across all of the key parts of revenue technology, if you like. So if you, at least historically, maybe you might be making compromises in certain areas, and do we want to do that? I think then the problem you get into is if you haven't made the decision early. Like if I met someone tomorrow and they were setting up a revenue team, I would say, and they had nothing, I would say really try and get as much as you possibly can under one roof to make your life easier. I completely buy into the concept. The problem is when you're halfway down the road already, it's complicated. So I think you have to have, like with any role, right? You have to have a strategy for your immediate future, and you have to have a strategy for your longer term future. And if you never start planning to consolidate your platforms, it will never happen. And then the problem with that is it costs you more to run. It's more complicated to deal with the companies that you're working with. But then equally, there is a risk on the other side, right? Like, so if you do consolidate everything, then what happens if something happens to that company you're working with, which obviously is pretty unlikely, but you're starting to put all your eggs in one basket as well. So I buy into the concept. I struggle to get my head around that actually how I'm going to do it is the honest answer to that question.
Yeah, it's a fair answer. It's a fair answer, Sam. Is there pressure from above, pressure from your CRO or from your CFO to accelerate the rate at which you consolidate vendors, or are they somewhat ambivalent?
I would say they're somewhat ambivalent. Where the pressure comes from is more from a CTO point of view. I think our CTO definitely recognizes this is what we need to do. So I think it's inevitable. And, it comes at a bit of a cost, really. So, and I think this is one of the challenges of maybe sellers who are out there peddling the message of like single platform, lower costs, it's all true, but there's a cost of change involved in that that's quite significant. So yeah, the pressure will come, I think. I think actually the way the pressure will come in reality is how do we save money? Whilst no one will be saying consolidate the platforms, like we'll be expected to start not necessarily saving money, I suppose, but just being mindful of costs.
That's right. Okay. Thank you very much. Super interesting to hear your thoughts on how you've kind of avoided the shelfware issue, how you're thinking about and always thinking about the solutions, the tooling, the technology that you do have and how it's working in service of your sales team. I'm curious now to totally switch gears and talk more about you again, personally. For people that are looking to earn a role or pursue a career in revenue operations, what advice would you give them? What would you say they should be focusing on? What kind of tips or tricks would you have?
So, well, I think anyone who's considering it, I think you've got my wholehearted support. If anyone ever wants to reach out and ask me anything, I'm really happy. I'm really passionate about this world, and I think it's really exciting. There's probably a pause moment to talk to revenue leaders for a second, which is really, really think about where you find your talent. I think we have an opportunity to be really creative with where we find our talent in revenue operations, and I think it's really exciting, and it can bring in more diverse thought into our teams. So, I've got a guy who used to be on the support desk at Pearson, and he just was like this super affable, character, great communicator, but obviously has a tech brain on him, if you see what I mean. I've got a guy who's come up through your traditional sales ops route, so that's probably a more traditional, well-trodden route. I've got an intern who's amazing, who literally has come from college, and like he has no real experience, but is learning so fast. It's incredible. He has the right sort of brain on him. So my point is, it's a really exciting time to not just take from the same place all the time as revenue operations people. When I was in sales enablement, there's similarities potentially. We had ex-marketing people, we had ex-teachers, all sorts of different places that people came from. I think in terms of people trying to get into it, I think, realize that there's a few different disciplines within revenue operations, and that's probably the first thing to think about and get your head around where you might want to go. So, do you really enjoy analytics? Do you really enjoy enablement? Do you really enjoy the platform side of things? I think the other question you have to ask yourself is, do you actually get a kick out of helping people? If you don't, it might not be the place for you. I've had salespeople occasionally express an interest in it, And that's fine. And I've had some salespeople that have been brilliant when they've come across, but like I've had to really sort of like be sure with them that, you realize that this isn't going to be the Kyle show anymore, Kyle. Okay. This is going to be Kyle is in the background and, it's everyone else's show. And then I think the other thing is just go out there and start learning some basic skills. Like this guy, who's the intern, there's two reasons why I got him, or why he just turned my head and I was like, right, we have to employ this guy. The first is, and you'll love this, Kyle, how he got himself an internship is he set up a campaign on HubSpot. He set up HubSpot himself at home on his laptop. Yes. And he did a campaign on HubSpot to try and get an internship. That's just
brilliant.
That's just brilliant. And then when he came for the role, he had already started learning some basic Salesforce stuff on Salesforce online. That you can do this, right? You don't need to be in a company. You don't need to be doing that role already. You can go off and take your Trailblazer badges or whatever. Go and do some of that stuff. It will set you out from the crowd, especially if you're really early in your career. Like, what are those things that can set you out from the crowd of people who would rather go and hit the gym or go to a bar after work or something like that? Just go and do some of these. Learn about Salesforce, learn about HubSpot, learn about other tools that are out there. Get some badges and then prove to people that you've got some skills, essentially.
This is the secret to career development and, climbing the ladder, as it were, or achieving whatever role you want, is you have to be able and willing to do the things that other people aren't. And that little list that you just gave, Sam, is wonderful. So thank you so much for sharing. We are almost out of time here, and I have one last bonus question for you, which is a question I'd like to ask everybody, partially for my own curiosity and partially because the audience appreciates it. What book would you recommend to aspiring RevOps professionals? It could be fiction, nonfiction, business-related, psychology-related. Go whatever direction you want to go. But for somebody who's an aspiring RevOps pro, what would you tell them?
Oh, God, that's a good question. I'm going to misquote the title of it, which I feel really bad about. It's a while ago I read it. It's got quite a rude title as well, about not giving a...
Oh, The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F.
Yeah. I read that book a long time ago, and actually I think that book helped me an awful lot when I moved to product. People who worked with me, if there's anyone listening who worked with me, I'm sorry, because I think when I first read that book, I took it quite literally, if you see what I mean. So I think you have to be quite thick-skinned in RevOps, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
When it goes wrong, you are going to be the people that get all the questions. And if you take those things personally, it can be quite a daunting place to be. And actually, you talked about RevOps people being really logical. This is probably where that really comes as a superpower, if you like, because they can sit there and very logically say, well, we're not performing here. And they're not attached to that. When I first started in this role, sort of slight tangent, but the finance person over in this team went, before you start, like, what actually is RevOps? Because I've never really heard of it. And I sort of gave him like an explanation and and he said, oh, so it sounds like your job is to call BS on the sales teams. I was like, that's not what I said. But I think you do have to be quite able to do that. And I think that book really helped for that, despite the fact that I couldn't remember the title of it and I completely blanked on that. So
it's more important that you remember the lessons than you remember the title. But the book is The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F. This is a family podcast, so we're not going to swear. And the author is Mark Manson.
Yes, it is. Yeah, well done. Well done. I'm going to have another book, if that's okay, just because I think...
Please.
Like, I'm not a big... I don't read business books a lot, to be honest with you, Kyle. It's not my thing. I live and breathe it. Life's too short. I love a book called All the Light We Cannot See.
Anthony Doerr.
It's an amazing book.
You're the second person to recommend this. Nick Mehta, CEO of Gainsight, also recommended this book.
Oh, really?
Yes.
It's a brilliant book. I've read it twice in probably the last year and a half. Beautifully written, makes you think. It makes you reassess moments in history that you kind of thought you sort of knew about. You sort of think about things differently. So yeah, it's a beautiful book. I'd highly recommend it.
Sam Sutton-Reid, you're a wonderful person. You're a wonderful RevOps leader, Director of Revenue Operations at Pearson. Thank you much for joining us today.
Thanks, Kyle, very much.
Don't let what you heard today go to waste. Take 2 minutes to download today's checklist to get your priorities in line for the week. You can find that linked in our show notes. And if you liked what you heard, make sure you give us a 5-star rating and leave a review. We'll be back next Monday with more to help you win your week.